So even with the progress we've made on LGBTQ plus rights, nearly 2 million LGBTQ plus youth in the country struggle with their identity and acceptance. For them, the Trevor Project is a real lifeline, providing crisis intervention and suicide prevention services. Amit Paley is CEO and Executive Director and joins me now. Amit, great to see you. Wow, I mean, you haven't gotten your hair cut lately. I'm used to you with the short hair. Thanks for joining us. I was intrigued when I got in this. I mean, I want you to tell the story to people. You began your relationship with the Trevor Project, which I love and value so much, by volunteering with the Trevor Lifeline, doing phone calls. So tell us how you began this journey into what you're doing now.
Well, I got started with the Trevor Project, as you said, almost a decade ago. It was a period of time that folks watching this might remember when there were a number of very well-publicized suicides of LGBTQ young people. And it impacted me in a very personal, emotional way. And I knew I wanted to get involved somewhere and try to make a difference. And when I found out that I could volunteer at the Trevor Project on our 24/7 phone lifeline, for a few hours on the weekend and literally save lives of young people, I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I started that almost a decade ago and have just gotten more and more involved in the organization and joined on staff as CEO exactly 3 years ago this month.
Well, I think what what I shared and what I know about you personally is that you're able to get yourself into the minds of someone. And it's something I find missing in Washington. I find it missing in a lot of society. People broadcast more loudly what they feel or believe or say, but there's not a lot of listening out there and not a lot of hearing and not a lot of feeling. And so I'm interested in, I don't know, what are the rules of the road, if you will, in helping people understand how to get in to them, how to hear someone else and where they're at?
Well, I think it starts with listening. It starts with a desire to listen more than you are talking. And that is what we do on our direct services for LGBTQ young people. They often are living in homes with families and communities where people do not see them, do not recognize their identity. They're talking about who they are, and people are either ignoring them or denying what they are saying. And so when they reach out to the Trevor Project, either on our phone, text, chat lifelines, or other programs, the main thing that we are doing is making sure that we are hearing who they are, that we are recognizing the dignity and beauty of their identities, and affirming that they deserve to be loved and respected for who they are. And far too many young people in this country and around the world today do not get that. They do not get to have people who actually see and respect them for who they really are.
What is if you were to kind of draw us a map of where the greatest problems of bullying across, in communities, the greatest problem of mental health, struggle and survival, which parts of the communities do we need to be far more aware of today as we think about who's struggling out there?
It's a great question. I think to start with, we need to be aware that LGBTQ youth as a broad community still face a number of challenges. You mentioned there are almost 2 million LGBTQ youth just in the United States who seriously consider suicide every year. That's 39% of LGBTQ young people in this country have seriously considered suicide in the past year. So this is a broad public health crisis that affects the entire LGBTQ community. And we know that there are parts of our community that are at particular risk. Transgender and non-binary young people are at particular risk because of the discrimination they still face across the country and continued attacks in state capitals that are continuing as we speak, even amidst this pandemic and nationwide reckoning with racial justice. People continue to attack trans and non-binary young people. And then we know that there are people of color, in particular Black LGBTQ youth in our community, are impacted by what happens to their identities as part of the LGBTQ community, but also their identities as Black people living in this country. And then, of course, we have people who are both transgender and who are Black, and the intersection of those identities can create a lot of challenges and discrimination. So it's important that we recognize this broader issue and challenges of LGBT youth, but that we pay particular attention to the most marginalized and most discriminated against in our community.
One of the groups I've worked with in the past is the National Council on Behavioral Health. They were very focused on mental health, and they innovated something I found quite interesting called mental health first aid. and to try to make mental health first aid sort of as active as learning CPR around communities. You've been working on something similar, I think, the National Suicide Hotline Designation Act, which is sort of a different form of not a 911, but something that would be along those lines to help people connect and call. So tell us about the National Suicide Hotline.
Well, so we currently have a national suicide prevention lifeline in this country that people can reach out to. That is for the general population. The Trevor Project is focused on LGBTQ youth, and the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is for all people in this country. But part of the issue is there is a number that is hard for people to remember. There is not enough funding for it. And the Lifeline does not connect into resources like the Trevor Project for at-risk communities. And so there is right now a bill pending in Congress. It has actually passed the Senate. I'll tell you what it is first, and then I'll come back to the political situation. So the National Suicide Hotline Designation Act would establish 988 as a new nationwide 3-digit phone number for that National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And our hope is that, as you said, it will become the 911 for mental health, that it will provide increased funding, and that it will include specialized services for populations like LGBTQ youth. It has actually unanimously passed already the Republican-led U.S. Senate, and that legislation was actually LGBTQ inclusive. It specifically mentioned specialized services. So that was a remarkable achievement, and it is waiting to be passed by the House of Representatives. We know that we have the votes in the U.S. House to pass this, but it has to come up for a vote. And so we want to encourage everyone to encourage your representatives in the House and encourage leaders in the House to please bring this to a vote. Suicide is a public health crisis in this country, and it particularly affects the LGBTQ community. And so we've been working with partners across the mental health space and the LGBTQ space and anywhere we can to encourage funding and passage of this act.
I mean, you sit on an organization that many people value and support, and it's active and has supporters all around the nation. But I'm interested in kind of the human stories, if you can share any that are in the bounds of of people's privacy. But on transformation, sometimes there are communities that people come from. I'm going to be talking to a gentleman shortly that came from, deep South Mississippi, and what it was like to come out and to kind of deal with those issues. And I'm interested in, how a community finally learns that it has to become supportive, that it can't just tolerate people, it has to embrace them. And I'm just interested, and I don't even know what you're going to say here, but have you had experiences where you've seen real transformation of the communities in which these individuals you're trying to help worries, or do you just try to say, hey, get a ticket out of that community and leave it because it's not healthy for you?
We do not say that people have to get a ticket out of that community because, first of all, some people don't want to do that, and some people don't have the options or resources to do that. Not everyone can leave where they are, and not everyone wishes to. So what we try to do when we engage with people one-on-one is to find out what options they are considering, what options they have, and what they can do, and try to get to safe places and to affirm them for who they are. It might sound silly and trite, but actually having someone affirm you and support you and accept you can make an enormous difference. We put out some research recently that showed that having just one accepting adult in an LGBTQ young person's life can reduce their risk of suicide by 40%. From a public health perspective, that's an enormous number. 40% risk in suicide is incredible. And so at the Trevor Project, we aim to be those people, but I also hope everyone listening knows you can be that person for an LGBTQ young person. And you may be talking to people who are trapped. I mean, when we talk about COVID-19 right now, part of the challenge of that, and we hear this all the times on our crisis services, that young people are trapped right now in homes with families who are unaccepting and unsupportive. They might be emotionally abusive, they might even be physically abusive. And we can't magically solve the problem in those young persons' lives. That would be trivializing and condescending to their situation. But what we can say to them is that there may be people who don't accept you for who you are, and people in your family may be some of those people. But we also want you to know that there are many, many people in the world who will not only accept you for being who you are, but will celebrate you for being who you are. And that I am one of those people, and I want you to know I'm proud of you for being who you are. And those seem like maybe they're simple words, and they are just words, but I can't tell you the number of times when I have said that to a young person, and there are just tears on the other end of the line because they say, I've never heard anyone say that to me. I've never heard someone say to me that I should be proud of who I am, and I never thought someone would say that. And that hearing that gives them some hope and gives them some feeling of not being alone, which can dramatically reduce their risk of suicide. And so I want to make sure that people don't underestimate how powerful words and messages of support and acceptance can be.
That's very powerful. You know Washington, D.C. well, and a lot of the world gets along just fine by, taking the wide circle around Washington and not worry about what's going on here. How much do you need Washington to behave better than it is on these issues? Or are you able to build resilience in young people without worrying about the messages out of this town?
We need to do both. We need to build resilience and support young people directly, and we need to make sure that people in positions of power, including lawmakers and policymakers in DC, and very importantly, lawmakers and policymakers in state capitals across the country, are not taking actions to harm LGBTQ youth. I think it's important to recognize that even at the height of this pandemic, there were state legislatures that were and continue to consider bills that are targeting transgender and non-binary young people. There have been two main flavors the past few months. One has been trying to prevent trans and non-binary young people from playing sports on teams that are consistent with their gender identity. And there's another group of bills that have been trying to actually prohibit doctors from providing gender-affirming care for trans and non-binary youth. And I have to say, it is beyond disappointing and upsetting and saddening and infuriating that with all the problems in the world today, we have a public health crisis, we have a financial crisis, we have the crisis of systemic racism and senseless murders of Black Americans in the streets in broad daylight. And with all those problems and many more, lawmakers are taking the time and wasting their time targeting and attacking young people because of their gender identity. That is just wrong. And so while we need to continue supporting one-on-one LGBTQ youth, I think we also need to send a clear message to those lawmakers and policymakers that they cannot they cannot attack young people regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity.
This is perhaps an unfair question, but I am interested in it. I'm sure it's a matter of degree. But are faith communities friend or foe?
Well, I think we don't want people to make broad generalizations about LGBTQ people, and I don't think it's appropriate to make broad generalizations about people of faith and faith communities. There are many faith communities that are helping LGBTQ young people every day, that are sending message of support and love and acceptance. And we also know that there are faith communities that are doing the opposite, that are causing harm and are attacking young people. It's very important to us at the Trevor Project that we are trying to build bridges with the faith community and different faith communities. And that's because we have so many LGBTQ young people who are reaching out to us every day who identify as people of faith and have very, very deep faith. And we want to make sure that there isn't some false choice presented to them that you can either be LGBTQ or you can be a person of faith. That is a devastating choice for many young people to make because they want both parts of their identity and they should be able to have them. And so we want to send a message that is a false choice. You can absolutely be a person of faith and be an LGBTQ person, and we see that every day. We also see cases where that's being distorted. We know that what's known as conversion therapy, which is completely discredited by every major medical and mental health group, and is the practice of trying to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. It does not work, and it dramatically increases someone's risk of suicide, and yet we know it is still legal today to practice it on minors in 30 states in this country. And so we need to work with faith leaders to stand up for wrong and harmful processes like that. and stand up for the dignity of LGBTQ youth.
Well, Amit Paley, CEO of the Trevor Project, it's an honor to have you on here today and to salute the work you do for so many young people. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it and look forward to checking back in with you again. Thank you.